Winter had buried the frontier settlement of Red Hollow beneath endless snow, but the cold that struck hardest arrived when the doors of the trading warehouse closed in front of Evelyn Harper and her young son, Noah. Since her husband Samuel had died in a logging accident the year before, Evelyn had worked every task the settlement offered. She repaired grain sacks, cleaned storage rooms, counted supplies, and spent long nights sweeping the warehouse floors after everyone else had gone home. In return, she and Noah were allowed to sleep in a narrow corner behind stacked crates near the furnace room. Everyone knew the arrangement would not last forever, but nobody expected it to end on the very morning that a mountain storm was preparing to consume the valley. Merchant Gideon Mercer folded his arms and announced there was no longer enough food to shelter people who could not contribute more. Beside him stood Pastor Elias Ward, who quietly called the decision unfortunate, but necessary. The townsfolk watched from windows and wooden porches covered in frost. No voices rose in protest. No one stepped forward to help. Evelyn listened in silence. She had warned Gideon months earlier that moisture was leaking through the warehouse roof and spoiling grain supplies stored beneath the eastern beams. The warning had been ignored. The leak had remained. Outside, Noah stood beside their old mule Daisy while clutching a glass jar wrapped in cloth. Inside the jar lived the sourdough starter his father had cared for during every season of their marriage. Gideon returned with what he considered generosity: a sack of damaged flour, several onions, and an old shovel with a broken handle. Evelyn accepted the supplies without a word. As she lifted the flour sack, she felt the hardened lumps already forming inside from trapped moisture. Snow rolled across the frozen street as Noah guided Daisy toward the road leading north. Their shepherd dog, Rust, followed quietly behind them. Before leaving, Evelyn glanced once more toward the warehouse roof, where warped boards sagged beneath layers of ice. The same leak she had warned about still waited there. The same silence surrounded it. Hours later, the road narrowed as it climbed toward the northern cliffs known as Hollow Ridge Pass. Evelyn remembered something Samuel had once mentioned after helping surveyors traveling through the territory. Hidden beyond the cliffs was a forgotten canyon, where warm springs were said to rise beneath the ground. Most settlers dismissed the story as rumor. Samuel had not. As the sky darkened and snow erased their tracks behind them, Evelyn guided Daisy toward the place others had forgotten. The storm reached them before the canyon did. Noah stumbled repeatedly through deep drifts, while Rust pushed ahead through the snow. Suddenly the dog stopped near a rocky hillside and began pawing at exposed stone, where the snow seemed strangely thin. Faint mist drifted upward from cracks in the earth before vanishing into the freezing air. Evelyn stepped closer and felt something impossible beneath her boots. The ground was cold, but not frozen. Following the trail of steam, they squeezed through a narrow opening between limestone walls and entered a hidden ravine sheltered from the worst of the wind. The storm still roared. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, but inside the canyon, its voice seemed distant and weakened. Patches of bare soil appeared beside the rocks, and small streams of water trickled beneath sheets of ice. Evelyn knelt and pressed her fingers into the earth. Instead of frozen stone, the soil crumbled softly beneath her touch. Samuel's forgotten story suddenly felt very real. As darkness approached, Evelyn discovered a shallow rock shelter protected by an overhanging ledge. She built a small fire and carefully watched the smoke. Instead of filling the shelter, it drifted through unseen cracks and disappeared into the darkness beyond. Fresh air was moving through the cave. The shelter could breathe. Outside, the blizzard closed over the mountains. Inside, for the first time since leaving Red Hollow, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that morning might still come. Thank you for watching Will West Tales Stories. Subscribe to the channel for part 2 of this unforgettable frontier survival journey. The first days inside the hidden canyon vanished beneath endless work. Shelter alone could not defeat winter. Evelyn used stones from the ravine floor to build a protective wall across the exposed side of the alcove, while Daisy hauled smaller rocks through the snow. Noah gathered dry branches trapped beneath ledges and carried them back beside the fire. Rust rarely rested for long and lifted his head at every unfamiliar sound echoing through the canyon. Slowly, the cave began to resemble something more than an emergency refuge. Evelyn built a raised sleeping platform from branches and stone supports to keep their blankets above the freezing ground. Nearby, she tied together a hanging rack where food could stay dry and away from animals. The walls leaned unevenly, and the platform creaked whenever someone moved. Yet each piece solved another problem Winter hoped to exploit. On the third day, Evelyn discovered a second chamber, deeper within the cave. A narrow crack in the ceiling allowed sunlight to spill onto the floor for several hours each afternoon. More importantly, the chamber remained warmer than the outer shelter. Standing beneath the beam of light, Evelyn remembered the leather pouch of seeds Samuel had carried for years while dreaming of owning farmland of his own. Winter wheat, beets, kale, and hardy roots waited inside the small pouch. They had survived the journey north in the bottom of her supplies bag. Suddenly, those seeds felt less like memories and more like possibilities. Bread came first. Noah carefully held his father's sourdough jar, while Evelyn attempted to build a clay oven against the cave wall. The smell of baking dough filled the chamber with hope, but hope alone could not bake bread. When the loaf finally emerged, the crust was burnt while the center remained heavy and uncooked. Days of precious flour had been wasted. Noah tried to eat it anyway, but quietly set the piece aside after only a few bites. Evelyn stared at the oven for a long time before understanding the mistake. The flames had touched the bread, but the heat had escaped too quickly. The next morning she rebuilt the oven with thicker stone, walls designed to hold warmth long after the fire had died. While the clay dried, she prepared the garden chamber beneath the sunlight crack. Soil from the ravine mixed with ash, sand, and leaves gathered beneath nearby trees. Into the first rows, she planted kale, wheat, and beets. For several days, everything seemed promising until the smallest plants began collapsing against the earth. Moisture collected along the cave walls and dripped onto the garden beds during the coldest hours of the night. The warmth of the cave had hidden a different enemy. Water was slowly suffocating the roots. Instead of planting again immediately, Evelyn spent days studying the chamber itself. She marked damp areas with stones and tracked how sunlight moved across the floor each afternoon. Eventually, patterns appeared. Moisture gathered only near one wall, where cold air met warm stone. Using branches, she built a barrier that allowed air to flow between the plants and the rock surface. A narrow trench redirected water away from the roots. Days passed before signs of success finally returned. The kale stopped dying. Tiny shoots of wheat pushed through the soil once again. The cave had delivered its lesson. Survival depended on understanding the land rather than fighting against it. Weeks later, the second loaf emerged from the rebuilt oven. Steam escaped through cracks in the crust and drifted through the chamber. Noah followed the smell before his eyes had fully opened. Outside, winter still ruled the mountains, but inside the hidden canyon warm bread existed where none should have survived. Thank you for watching Will West Tales Stories. Subscribe now because Part 3 brings the greatest challenge yet. Winter refused to surrender quietly. A brutal northern wind swept across the mountains and pushed temperatures lower than anything Evelyn had experienced before. The cave remained warmer than the outside world, yet a new problem slowly appeared. Samuel's sourdough starter stopped rising properly. The jar looked healthy and smelled normal, but each batch of dough grew weaker than the one before. Evelyn moved it beside the oven, near the sleeping platform, and even into the garden chamber, yet nothing changed. Eventually, she discovered the truth. During the coldest hours of night, the stone floor drew away just enough heat to weaken the living culture inside the jar. The starter never froze, but it slowed almost to silence. Wrapping the jar inside Samuel's old wool blanket and placing it beside a naturally warm section of limestone solved the mystery. Within 2 days, bubbles returned to the surface. Bread would survive the winter after all. As temperatures stabilized, the garden finally answered their efforts. Green shoots of wheat stretched toward the sunlight beam, while the kale leaves unfolded wider each week. Noah checked the plants every morning before breakfast and celebrated each new leaf as if greeting an old friend. Yet bread and greens alone could not sustain life through the endless season. Using scraps of wire salvaged from abandoned mining equipment hidden near the canyon entrance, Evelyn built simple snares for snow hares traveling through nearby brush trails. Guided by Rust's sharp instincts, the traps soon provided meat, bones for broth, and fur to strengthen their bedding. Slowly, the cave transformed into something remarkable. Food grew beneath stone ceilings while fresh bread baked. Beside the fire and warm water flowed beneath the frozen mountains above. One afternoon, Noah stared at the patch of green wheat and whispered that he had forgotten what living plants looked like. Then the canyon itself delivered a warning. A violent gust of wind entered through passages that had never carried air before. Dust drifted from the ceiling, and small stones rattled down the walls. Rust began barking toward the darkness deeper within the cave. Following the sound, Evelyn discovered a narrow tunnel hidden behind fallen rocks. Warm air rushed steadily from the opening. Curiosity overcame fear. Carrying a lantern, she followed the passage until it widened into a chamber unlike anything she had imagined. A stream of steaming water flowed through the center of the cavern, while mineral walls glowed beneath reflected light. The hidden spring beneath the mountain was real. More importantly, it offered enough warmth to protect the shelter even during the worst storms. Over the following weeks, Evelyn redirected part of the warm water closer to the garden beds, using shallow channels carved through the soil. The plants responded immediately. Growth accelerated despite the endless winter outside. By early spring, the cave was producing more food than the family required. Then, one morning, distant voices echoed through the canyon entrance. The storm had finally released the roads. Settlers from Red Hollow stood outside staring at smoke rising from the cliffs where no home should have existed. Among them stood Gideon Mercer himself, thinner than before and carrying worry across his face. The warehouse roof had collapsed beneath heavy snow exactly where Evelyn had warned him months earlier. Grain had spoiled and food was disappearing quickly. For several moments nobody spoke. Then Noah broke a loaf of bread and placed half of it into Gideon's hands. Survival had taught them something the town had forgotten long ago. Communities endure through kindness long after pride has frozen away. Thank you for watching Wild West Tales Stories. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful frontier survival stories.